Right next door to the US, a relentless war unfolds, a battle that has raged since December 2006, when Mexico declared war on its powerful drug cartels. These are no ordinary criminals. They command armies, control territories, and fight over access to the lucrative drug pathway into the US, a nation grappling with an insatiable demand for narcotics. This violent saga began under President Calderón, who deployed 6,500 soldiers to Michoacán, sparking a conflict that shows no signs of abating almost 2 decades later. These cartels extend their influence deep into the political fabric, corrupting officials in Mexico and the US. Meanwhile, a dark alliance forms with the Chinese Communist Party, supplying the cartels with the means to produce fentanyl, a scourge on American streets that's slashing life expectancy. In the face of this growing threat, the Texas Rangers took decisive action in October 2023 at one of the most notorious trafficking hotspots along the US-Mexico border. But who are these modern-day Rangers, and what drastic steps did they take to stem the tide of organized crime? As we delve into this gritty saga, we explore the strategic moves and their broader impact on the ongoing border crisis that has ensnared the United States since 2021. Let's unravel the complex web of conflict and courage in this relentless border saga. The Texas Rangers are one of the oldest police organizations in the United States and the oldest law enforcement organization with statewide jurisdiction on the North American continent. The unit originated in 1823 when Stephen F. Austin, the father of Texas, organized a paramilitary group to provide protection for the 600 to 700 American families who had colonized the area on invitation from the Spanish government, which then ruled Mexico, of which Texas was a part. Because these troops needed to range over broad tracts of land, they were called Rangers. This body of troops became more permanent in the 1830s, as the then self-proclaimed Republic of Texas had tensions with the newly independent Mexico. Defenders were needed at the border and against attacks by Native Americans, and the Rangers were designed to carry out both these tasks. Clashes with the Native Americans were far more frequent than the more dramatic battles with Mexico, and the Rangers continued in this service after joining the Union and officially being recognized as part of the United States following the Mexican-American War. In a convention held on January 28, 1861, Texas seceded from the Union. The Rangers did not officially participate in the American Civil War, but many of the men who made up the unit did. Terry's Texas Rangers, named after its commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin Franklin Terry, was organized later that year and fought as part of the Confederate Army. Nevertheless, the Union won the war, Texas was occupied, and the Rangers were temporarily disbanded during Reconstruction. They were instead re-regimented as the state police under the Reconstruction-era government. But after Reconstruction ended in 1873, following the previous year's highly disputed presidential election, the Rangers were reconstituted. As the frontier closed, the Rangers gradually shifted from being a paramilitary group to getting involved in investigative and police work. In 1935, about a century after their foundation, the transition was made official, as the Rangers were folded into the newly created Texas Department of Public Safety. In this capacity, they act as the State Bureau of Investigation, Texas's equivalent to the FBI. In October 2023, amid the ongoing border crisis, the Texas Rangers turned their attention to Fronton Island in the Rio Grande. This island is newly formed and did not exist when the Rangers were created. The river cut a new channel between 1852 and 1926 that gradually separated this piece of real estate from the mainland. As this separation came after the Mexican-American War and Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, there were some disputes as to the nationality of this new island. The 1848 treaty set the Rio Grande as the border between the two countries. Land north of the river was considered American territory, with the south bank being Mexican. The channel that created the island split cut it off from the mainland to the north. Did this mean that it was now part of Mexico? For decades, this question was left in legal limbo, and both sides largely stayed clear of the island. However, the issue was settled in 1976. That year, the International Boundary and Water Commission, which was created in 1889 by the United States and Mexico to handle any future territorial issues, recognized Fronton as American territory, in line with a new treaty between the two countries that came into force in 1970. Fronton Island is today considered part of Texas's Starr County. Fronton Island is uninhabited. It has a length of about 2 miles and a total area of about 160 acres. The island is largely flat, with a highest elevation of 177 feet. As nobody lives on the island, no one was around to control the growth of fauna, and thick vegetation covered it at the time of the raid. Also, because nobody lives there, Fronton Island did not have a high profile. Government agents on both sides of the border tended not to go there in order to prevent any international disputes, even after the questions about its ownership were settled in the 70s. As early as the 1980s, the island showed its potential as a stronghold for criminal activity. On June 10, 1983, 7 convicts were working in a prison yard on the Mexican side of the border. Sensing an opportunity, the criminals used their tools to attack a guard, striking him in the head. They then took his weapon, escaped through a gate that had been opened for a lumber delivery, and fled to Fronton Island. 3 of the men were being held in connection with the murders of 2 Mexican federal police officers. Authorities from both sides of the border cooperated in their attempts to arrest the fugitives, but it wasn't an easy task. The dense foliage on Fronton Island made surveillance and intelligence gathering nearly impossible. Helicopter observation proved nearly useless. 3 of the fugitives were not apprehended until the 12th. Reports on the other 4 are difficult to find. The vegetation on Fronton Island makes it ideal not only for hiding people, but for the cartel to conceal their illicit cargoes. The Rio Grande is also shallow in this area and relatively easy to cross compared to the deeper areas elsewhere. To make the island even more desirable as a transit point, there is a well-established road network near the river crossing on the Mexican side of the border, making it easy for the cartels to move their wares. All of these factors made Fronton Island a perfect place to act as a hotspot for organized crime, and the Mexican drug cartels have long used it as a transit point for narcotics, weapons, and human trafficking. To combat these trends and the massive surge in border crossings, the state of Texas launched Operation Lone Star in March 2021. The mission's objective was to deter illegal immigration and the trafficking in weapons and narcotics across the border by the cartels. It began with Governor Abbott's disaster declaration in 53 counties in the state that month. Such a declaration gave him the authority to deploy the Texas National Guard to the border. Operation Lone Star is a joint effort between the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Military Department, which the State National Guard falls under. Texas's governor's office claims that as of March 2024, Operation Lone Star has resulted in the apprehension of over 500,000 people crossing the border, over 40,000 criminal arrests, 36,000 of which were felony arrests, and the seizure of 469 million doses of fentanyl. However, independent investigations have revealed that at least 2,000 of these arrests had no clear link to Operation Lone Star, casting doubt on some of the other numbers. Nevertheless, a year after it started, Operation Lone Star began to show results. Illegal entries into Texas did increase between March 21 and March 22, but at a rate of 6.9% compared to the 36.3% in Arizona, 30% in California, and 47% in New Mexico. But the challenges continue. In the spring of 2023, the Biden administration declared an end to the COVID-19-related state of emergency in the United States. One of the consequences of this declaration was the end of enforcement of Title 42, the public health-related ordinance that allowed for easier removal of people crossing the border. Governor Abbott responded to the anticipated increase by requesting the assistance of other states through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which makes it easier for states to assist one another with resources in the wake of a disaster. 14 Republican-controlled states responded to the request, with Florida sending the most personnel at about 1,100. Activity along Fronton Island increased throughout 2023, and as part of Operation Lone Star, the Texas Land Commissioner, Dawn Buckingham, authorized the Department of Public Safety to patrol the area on September 7th. This paved the way for the raid the following month. The raid had recent precedent. 2 islands 90 miles to the northwest, near the Eagles Pass border crossing hotspot, were seized earlier by the Texas Department of Public Safety. Deterring illegal border crossings was the purpose behind the earlier raids, which gave the Texas Rangers operational experience in taking control of these small islands. On October 9th, the Texas Rangers launched their raid. Before doing so, they secured cooperation with their Mexican counterparts across the border, although doing this came with its own dangers. Seizing a series of structures built by the cartels was the first purpose of the raid. Doing so would restore operational control of Fronton Island to the state of Texas. Law enforcement on the island had been so lax that the cartels were marking these buildings with their symbols as their territory, and this was done for a reason. Fronton not only sits on the boundaries between the United States and Mexico, but on the border between the Gulf Cartel and the Cartel del Noreste, which has been allied to the Los Zetas cartel. The cartels therefore not only fought with American and Mexican law enforcement in the area, but with each other. To prove the point, some of the buildings were riddled with bullet holes from firefights between the rival cartels, and indeed, surveillance footage showed armed cartel personnel patrolling the island. The buildings were built on the island's high points to give the cartels an advantageous field of fire. The cartels were so brazen on the island that they at times fired on American law enforcement across the channel in the river. They shot at people on the southern side too. On September 9th, 2 days after Buckingham's authorization for the Texas Rangers to move on the island, a caravan of 20 people, 16 Mexicans and 4 Americans, came under attack near the island. 3 people were wounded in the incident. Essentially, this area in the United States territory was being militarized as part of the cartel's burgeoning narco polities extending from the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. This is one of the most dangerous areas in Mexico, and the US State Department has placed it on its Do Not Travel list. That it sits right across the border is a demonstration of just how chaotic things are down there. Operation Lone Star sought to restore operational control of this dangerous island to the United States and the state of Texas. Governor Abbott ordered his state security services to take the island and hold it, come what may. To clear Fronton Island out, the Texas Rangers needed to conduct this operation in a highly militarized fashion. The men who took part in the raid looked like they could have been members of the regular US Army, as they wore full camouflage and body armor while carrying military-grade weapons. Nevertheless, the location of the island necessitated restrictive rules of engagement. The Rangers were not to fire upon anyone unless they were shot at first, for fear of sparking an international incident. Fortunately, the Rangers had the help of drones. The operation began with drone surveillance. This was likely far more effective than the helicopter surveillance of the island had been in 1983, thanks to higher resolution cameras, thermal imaging, and drones being far less detectable, although we're only making an educated guess about this. As noted, the Mexican Federal Police cooperated with the Rangers in the operation. Their task was to cut off entry to the island from the south bank of the Rio Grande. Unfortunately, because the cartels have infiltrated the machinery of the Mexican government at every level of administration and in every agency, the participation of Mexican law enforcement from their side of the Rio Grande likely meant that the cartels were tipped off about the Rangers' operation. The Rangers were undoubtedly aware of this, but nevertheless acted in a way to achieve maximum surprise. They began their raid at the crack of dawn. In another show of how dangerous the island had become, the Rangers needed to be wary not only of small arms fire coming from the elevated perches, but of improvised explosive devices. Officers warned their men not to disturb backpacks or piles of clothes for fear they might be booby-trapped. And indeed, law enforcement officers had once found an IED amid stashes of rifles and ammunition. Fortunately, the Rangers found nobody on the island during their raid. The cartel members who got wind of the operation decided to flee rather than put up a fight. The participating Rangers posed with the flag of Texas to send the message that they had retaken Fronton. However, this was only the first phase of the operation. The island had been recaptured. Now the state of Texas needed to effectively occupy it. The day after the raid, the National Guard and Texas Department of Public Safety began to fortify Fronton to prevent access to it from the Mexican side of the border. Once the Rangers declared the island to be clear of hostiles, the Texas National Guard began construction. These fortifications included over 1.5 miles of razor wire. The National Guard also began to clear the vegetation on the island. This act raised objections from a few quarters. The growth of fauna on Fronton Island had helped it to become a de facto wildlife sanctuary. Scientific experts also warned that clearing the island of vegetation would bring a local environmental disaster. Betty Perez, a local botanist, said of the plan, "That's what's holding these islands down, the vegetation. We're heading into times when there are big storms. That island will just sort of blow away, and then the silt will end up going down the river and causing more damage." Despite the danger, Texas officials were determined to continue clearing the vegetation on the island. Buckingham responded that the environmentalists should get a real concern and that securing Fronton was necessary for the state of Texas to achieve its goal of having complete operational control of the border. Patrols of the area continue, but because of a shortage of personnel and a vast border to patrol in far busier sectors, these will only have limited effectiveness. Texas's Operation Lone Star has also faced legal challenges, as immigration policy is constitutionally in the federal domain, not the state one. The clashes between the state and federal authority came to the forefront in January 2024, when agents from Texas and other states fortified Shelby Park in Eagle Pass in the same manner that they had fortified Fronton a few months earlier. The objective of this effort, according to Governor Abbott, was to protect the sovereignty of the state of Texas. Extensive razor wire barriers were constructed in the park to prevent illegal border crossings. The Biden administration immediately raised a legal challenge and demanded that Border Patrol agents regain access to the park in order to process the people who had crossed the border. A lower court ruling sided with Texas and prevented federal authorities from cutting the razor wire that Texas had set up. This ruling was later reversed in a 5-4 decision by the US Supreme Court, but the ruling was ambiguous. The feds were allowed to remove the fortifications in Eagle Pass, but the ruling did not say that Texas could not construct more of them. The standoff has therefore continued. This is why securing control of the border will be much harder for Texas to do than capturing an uninhabited island in the river, and the limitations of the raid on Fronton became clear shortly afterward. Drone and hidden ground camera footage released a month after the operation on Fronton Island revealed that squads of armed cartel members were patrolling the same border area. The cartels were no longer on the island, but there was no evidence that the raid had seriously damaged their ability to continue their illegal traffic, even in the same sector along the border. Indeed, other officials warned at the time of the raid that the cartels would simply move their activities elsewhere. This is certain, but depriving them of Fronton Island's tactical advantages and legal ambiguity was the right move. The cartels will certainly have another area from which to conduct their activities, but the alternative might not be as advantageous for them as Fronton was. The border crisis and all that comes with it shows no signs of abating. The Texas border with Mexico is over 1,200 miles long. Trying to stop illicit activity along such a stretch will always in some way be a game of whack-a-mole. The cartels can take advantage of this by rerouting their activities to places that are less heavily patrolled. There are also parts of the border that are nearly impossible to patrol in a systematic way thanks to natural obstacles. Meanwhile, the population centers on both sides of the border do not perfectly align with one another. A heavily populated area south of the border can act as an easy staging point for the cartels to smuggle their human and material cargoes across to a deserted part of the northern side that is physically hard to patrol or which has no infrastructure like border barriers. The best way to mitigate this is through cooperation with the Mexican authorities in the population center on the southern side, but that's not guaranteed. Even if it was, the cartel's infiltration of Mexico's security services will often mean that they will be tipped off in advance and reroute their activities, making it an imperfect solution at best. With these factors and legal challenges sure to continue against Operation Lone Star, Texas is in many ways behind the eight ball. Despite the success of the raid on Fronton, the crisis of organized crime on the US southern border won't end anytime soon. What do you think about the raid on Fronton Island and the broader Operation Lone Star effort? Is there a way for Texas to make its efforts more effective? Can the increased use of drones in the air and on water eventually become a game changer in the battle against the cartels? And what operation might Texas Rangers carry out next? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out what's stopping the US Army from attacking Mexican cartels, or click this other video instead.